Get rolling? All right, hi. Thanks for coming. Our talk today is on narrative Legos. And what that is building narrative, replayable narrative out of lots of tiny little pieces. But before we get into that, who am I? I'm a creative director and a writer. I run Irrational Games until recently, and then for about 17 years. I was at Looking Glass before that. And we were known for doing a lot of linear narrative games. Starting my first game I worked on at Looking Glass was Thief, and then did System Shock 2, and Freedom Force, and Freedom Force: The Third Reich, and then the BioShock games. And I think we, as a team, and I see a lot of the team members out here, which is great. I think I'm pretty proud of what we did with linear narrative, and I think we took it pretty far, and we're very proud of what we did. But we've been, I've personally been doing it for almost 19 years. So why change? Well, the problem with narrative is that you sort of have to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And that gets time consuming, that gets expensive, and you're devoting years and years of your life to this one sort of big moment where you ship the game and it comes out and people play the game and it's 12 hours long, and they have that great experience, and you see cosplayers and fans for years like that, but you don't have that constant engagement with the audience. Another thing about the audience, linear narrative puts a boundary between the developer and the audience, because once you have a would you kindly or something like that in your story, you can't say, hey, player, open alpha, because once that's revealed, once those key story bits are revealed, that's really your secret sauce. And so we sort of had to have a lot of secrecy. We had to have a lot of behind closed doors. And we got very good at keeping secrets, but I don't think we ever really enjoyed the process of keeping secrets. It got very stressful, and I don't think it was great for building relationships with the audience. I think right now audiences want to be part of it. They want to communicate it. They want to be playing alphas. They want to be giving their feedback along the way. And linear narrative really doesn't allow for that. I've always been a fan of systemic games. I mean, I grew up I've been playing Civilization since the first one that came out, and I'll play every version of every Civilization, every add-on pack forever. XCOM is another one of my favorite games. I grew up playing paper, hex-based board games, but my games that I've worked on haven't really been like that, with the exception of Freedom Force a little bit. But narrative and systemic, they kind of fight with each other. And so we haven't really been able to sort of make, really integrate system work as much as possible. So to do something really different, we really had to go back to the drawing board, and that required a new structure, a smaller group of people, and time. That was the most important thing. Time to fail. Time to fail for a long period where you don't have 150 people who are looking at you and saying, dude, what am I supposed to be doing today? I want to say a couple of things that this is not. This talk is not a design for a specific game. I'm not here to pitch a product. It's a GDC talk. You're all developers. I'm a developer. This is just early thoughts on something that I want to put out there. This is not like a specific development plan where, oh my God, they cut that feature. There's no features here yet. We're just really talking at a very high level. It's not intellectual property. You're going to see nothing here like a Rapture or a Columbia. You're going to see me stealing a lot of meta intellectual property from other people that we're just using for the purpose of example. And for headline, if you're a journalist and your headline says, Levine reveals new game, you've written the wrong fucking headline. But one of you will write it, I guarantee it. All the content here you're going to see is basically just stolen from other places and from other great games, but it's the content, the kind of worlds, the kind of characters. It's just for the purposes of example. So that's a lot of what this isn't. What this is, it's a conversation. It's my way of contributing to a conversation, which I think is already going on. And a lot of people I respect in the industry have been thinking about some of these things. And this is me and my team trying to bring our sort of approach to it. And that's my PowerPoint skills at work. So it's our initial scratching in there to try to figure out a way to really make player-driven, these are the key words, player-driven, replayable narrative. Okay, so I want to say one thing. A lot of times these talks are like, well, don't record this, don't don't take pictures, don't do anything like that. This is completely open source. Take pictures, film it, put it on the internet, whatever you want to do. Do a riff tracks to it. I don't care. But tweet it. And most importantly, if it's something useful to you, steal whatever you want from it. I don't know how much it's going to be useful because it's pretty early, but there's nothing proprietary here that you should be remotely nervous about leveraging for your own stuff. All right, so we talked some about the negatives of linear narrative. It's incredibly expensive to make. The individual pieces don't speak to each other. They do emotionally, like what happened to Booker at the beginning of Infinite, talk to what happened at the end in the player's mind, but the game, there's nothing in the game in the way in Civilization, your choices you make at the beginning really make an effect at the end, like in a meaningful way, which types of cities you build, which types of cultural trees you've taken. They don't really do that in linear narrative. Branching does exist in a lot of games, not so much in our games, but there's still X number of states. And what I want to talk today is not X number of states, but X to the Y number of states. I haven't taken math since 1983, so I think that's right. Linear narrative doesn't really fully embrace the unique power of games, which is replayable and player-driven. As much as I love the narratives we did, really we were so much feeling, we knew the constraints of it so much that we kind of made a lot of meta-commentary on constraints because it is a constraint, and though I love that form, I think we sort of said what we had to say, and we want to see what's past it. And most importantly, it's not player-driven. You are seeing the same story your friend is seeing, or you're seeing X of Y versions of a story your friend is seeing. Multiple endings still mean a fixed number of player states. There's 5 endings. There's not X to the Y endings. And one of the most frustrating parts for me is you can only add in to a narrative game traditionally. Sorry, add on to a narrative game, meaning here's another chunk which you play that it's subsequent to what you already played. Or games like Civilization, games like XCOM, you can add in to the experience and enhance the experience from the very beginning of the game. So that's going to be a focus of what we talk about today as well. I don't want to underplay the work that's being done in this area. I think, if you look at stuff at BioWare, the stuff at, the Witcher guys are doing, there's a lot of really great work about opening up narrative, but I think they're taking a fundamentally different approach. But in no way do I want to say their work isn't extraordinary and important. So how do we traditionally think about AI? Whenever I talk to people about AI, a lot of people say to me, when do you think an AI is going to be like a person? When's it going to pass the Turing test? And I think that's fundamentally too ambitious a way to think about characters in AIs. Because I think we've all demonstrated there's nobody on the planet who's even close to this. I think we're several paradigm shifts of not just technology. As a writer, it's hard enough to write one good character, let alone a character that can react to any arbitrary thing and say clever and funny lines while he does it. So a really robust solution to this lies beyond any technology or creative horizon that we currently have. So we're really scratching at the surface. But I think we're giving up the good for the great, because I think there's real major steps we can make here, but we have to refocus our attention a little bit. If you're overly ambitious, can lead to paralysis, and I think that's what happens. Well, we can't do it, so let's just not even really try. So let's try. Some first steps. Physics. Remember 20 years ago, there was no physics in games. Physics was an animation that played when you dropped something that did not speak to any math really of any kind. But when they started with physics, and I got very excited because I love simulation, they started very simply with 2D circles and rectangles and spheres and then cylinders and axis-aligned boxes and so on and so on and so on. Now there's cloth and liquid, but they're still dealing with a subset, and they keep building up from that subset. But every time they add something to that subset, it gets more powerful and it gets more real feeling. But remember back in the day when the first things appeared, you weren't like, well, fuck this, it's not perfect physics, let's forget it, I'm not going to play it. It was exciting. And I think that there's a path to take here with characters. So if we don't try to model everything, but model a set of limited and believable and impactful things. So Let's try, as we think about this, to set some goals. Create a narratively driven experience where the narrative elements are nonlinear and they talk to each other. They interact with each other. They bounce off one another. Like, I was about to make some science reference, and again, I was a drama major, so I completely blanked on what that reference would be, like electrons or atoms. Does that sound right? Okay. And all these narrative elements trigger off of player action, not off authorial action. Meaning not like we decide, like in an infinite, for instance, you enter a bounding box. Generally, a narrative thing would happen when you enter a bounding box, and we say, oh, you enter the bounding box and conditions X, Y, and Z are met, so we'll trigger this narrative event. But those are generally off of where the author intends them to happen, not where the player arranges for them to happen. These triggers, these things that change the narrative state, the things you can interact with in the narrative have to be transparent to the player, so you're not just like out there doing things and people are reacting in completely crazy ways. We want to show you the things, the passions, and I'll talk to you about what passions are in a minute, what they are and how you can interact with them. So let's, I hope Todd Howard isn't here, but let's just sort of take his, their design, and it's, a lot of MMO style design and single player MMO like Skyrim design. Basics. So we have a game we can talk about that isn't necessarily in any way, shape, or form the game we're making, but it gives you some basis of understanding to apply the new stuff to. So let's assume a game, kind of open worldy, with factions you can choose between, with quests and character growth and armor to collect and monsters to fight and crafting of all kinds. I would expand my crafting I take a page out of Dark Cloud's book for this example too, Dark Cloud 2. Hope you've all played it. It's like one of the best games ever. You can actually craft, there you go. You can actually craft actual towns and buildings. And there's a cycle. You go to the dungeon, you collect loot, you collect crafting materials, you come back to the town, you can build parts of the town. That gives you buffs, that gives you new characters, that gives you new opportunities. There's a great cycle. What I talk about here is this strong loop between non-combat and combat. A really strong non-combat combat loop. Non-linear quest structure is also critical here. All right, so here's my incredibly innovative world. 4 villages. Imagine an open worldy kind of thing. There's an orc village, there's a dwarf village, there's a goblin village, and a elf village. And then there's you. You come into the world. And so now we start getting into the stuff that is the stuff we've been thinking about and the stuff we've been focusing our brain on. So in the orc village, there's lots of people. There's 5 stars in each town. Now that number is placeholder, but what I want is that when I say a star, these are the characters that really matter. And the question is, I don't want to overwhelm the player with 1,000 characters that matter because you just won't be able to track them. So the number is really how many people can the player really track? How many stars can the player track? Okay, what is a star? A star is an NPC with a set of capital P passions, a defined term, which I'll define in a minute. What's passion? Okay, these are not full psychological models. As I said, Tech before has been trying to really fully simulate a human being and all, and how they work, but I'm not really trying to do that. Let's go to literature and media. So you know a bunch of stuff about Luke Skywalker. He has passions, right? What are Luke's passions? He wants to prove himself. He wants to go on adventures. He has issues with his dad. These are things that really define him. There's things that probably exist. We all have things that exist. And think about Luke. Just forget the people you know, people you work with. You know a bunch about their passions, but you don't really know about their kinky, weird shit that goes on at home. And maybe you don't even want to know. So there are things that don't really matter. Maybe Luke is a vegetarian. Maybe he's one of those really jerky vegetarians who won't stop. I'm a vegetarian, so I kind of know. He's got he's got a terrible tooth decay problem. He's got OCD, and these are things that exist in Luke Skywalker, but they're just not relevant to the experience at hand. So let's not worry about that stuff. Let's just worry about his passions. So a passion is what a star cares about relative to the actions of the player, meaning relative to the things the player can impact upon. A passion is transparent to the player, meaning that the player can see these passions and see how they are, the character, the NPC is feeling about them in relation to these passions. A passion must be responsive to the player's actions. It has no meaning if you can't do anything about it. That's what, you know, you're the star, you're the center of this game. You want to be able to impact these passions. So let's meet Frank, one of the stars of the Orc Village. He's a blacksmith. He has a store. Hey, guess what? He sells a lot of armor and weapons and crap like that. But unlike most blacksmiths who just stand there and deal with you on price, Frank's a little more complicated. He's kind of a deep guy. He's got 3 passions. Let's just talk about one of those passions. He has a passion, which is he hates elves. And a lot of orcs share this passion. And can you guys see the cursor I'm drawing with here? Yeah. There it is. Oh, great. It's completely offset from my screen. So you see that all the characters' passions or feelings about you in regard to this thing. So Frank cares about hating elves, but this is really about how does he feel about you in relation to hating elves. Well, he doesn't know you at first, so he's neutral with you. You know, he's right in the middle. But as you do things relative to elves, either doing bad crap to elves or doing good stuff to elves, he likes you more or less in regard to this passion, okay? So, example. Frank hates elves, you kill an elf. Woo, he likes you for that, and his passion in this regard will move towards the positive. Nice and simple. On the other side, he hates elves. You help an elf of any kind. You know, you do a quest for an elf, you rescue an elf, you build a house for an elf, you woo an elf. He's going to feel more negative about this. This is all pretty simple, and you've seen some stuff like this in games before already. Frank has 3 passions that you know about at the beginning. And let's say the passions are he hates elves, he wants a temple to the old gods built, not the new gods, the old gods, and he wants to woo Barbara the orc because she's beautiful. And you can impact all these passions. You can help him build the temple. You can help him prove himself to Barbara. These are all normal sort of questing things and building things and crafting things and fighting things and dungeony things and collecting things. But they're all impacted by you. These won't move on their own except what you do relative to them. Now, the macro passion. Okay, this is where it gets interesting to me. The macro passion, and this is where my math won't come in again. I'm going to say it's a function. I'm going to say it's an average, and I'm probably completely wrong because there's probably somebody telling me it can't be an average, but I'm saying it's an average, so shut up. It's a function or an average of the three micro passions. Yields basically their overall feeling about you. And remember, so it's not just one feeling. It moves on all these different axes, but those yield a larger feeling about you. And you see these little black lines on the macro passion, that gold bar, those are called thresholds. And when you pass certain thresholds on that, Frank will start doing stuff for you or doing stuff against you, depending on how you're dealing with Frank. So, for instance, you steal the Elf King's crown. Remember, he does not like elves. So that micro passion feeds into the macro passion, and ding. Oh, I missed a slide. You kill some elves at the beginning. Ding, Frank says, oh, guess what? There's a 20% discount in my store from now on, as long as you don't go back past that threshold because you do things he doesn't like. Then you do something bigger. You steal an Elf King's crown. Ding, Frank offers to send NPCs, henchmen, to help you in battle. That will appear sometimes just when you need them. Now, player destroys an elf shrine. No ding, because you actually haven't crossed the threshold. But you're moving along the bar, so it's still good, but you haven't hit an actual threshold for a thing. Now you start hanging out with the elves, and you... no, that's the wrong thing. Oh, no, sorry, my mistake. You help build his temple to the old gods that he likes. Ding, he makes a special item for sale. I think you get the idea. Now, on the other side, you start hanging out with the elves, and maybe you kind of like one of the elves, and you do a quest for one of them. Well, Frank's going to hear about that. Unding, his micro passion of elves will move back a little bit, and maybe enough to actually affect the macro passion bar, and that special item that was on the shelf goes off the shelf. And he will reflect all this in his dialogue with you. Yeah, dude, heard what you did with the elves, not fucking cool. Feeding this back is all really, really important. I'm going to take a little sidestep here and talk about zero-sum games. And they're going to be very important to what we're talking about here. You may be sensing this already. $10 to anybody who spots the math error, which I forgot to fix. So zero-sum game is, say there's 10 gold, and Ken and Pierre both want the 10 gold. And either Ken, and you could have a bunch of situations. I got 10, he's got none. I got 0, he's got 10. I got 3, he's got 7. I got 6, he's got 5. Drama major. But it's a zero-sum game, meaning if he gains, I lose, I gain, he loses. Then there's non-zero-sum games. And I'm going to use Lucky Charms, because I like Lucky Charms as an example. Say I've got a surplus of blue moons, and Pierre has a surplus of pink hearts, more than we can possibly eat, but we really both want the variety. It's really important for our economy. We can trade. So I give my surplus to him. This is this classic, this is what trade is, right? He gives me his surplus, and now we both have much better economies because we have this mixture of resources we need. That's a non-zero-sum game. Zero-sum means you can't please everyone, and we're going to leverage zero-sum in this design substantially. So for instance, Frank and Pete hate elves. Player helps Romeo the elf, and Frank and Pete like you less. So the elves like you more, that elf likes you more, maybe other elves like you more, but they're going to like you less, zero-sum. But there's even a zero-sum between in villages themselves. Frank the orc loves the old gods. Well, Pete the orc is a cleric for the new gods, and every time you help build the old god temple, you're going to piss Pete the orc off. Now, you can trade them off against each other, because remember, these aren't unilateral. Each character has 3 or more passions. So you can really piss Pete off in regard to the temple, but you can help him out in other areas, and you're going to have to balance all these things off one another. But they're all going to be transparent to you, and we have to have a limited number of them so you can really track this all, so it just doesn't become a giant spreadsheet that overwhelms you. But, as I said, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Let's talk about the love that dare not speak its name. So, orc and elf. We have Juliet the orc is in love with Romeo the elf. Now, most of the orcs want bad crap to happen to the elves, except for Juliet. So you can go all day and pound on the elves, and all the orcs are going to love you, but you're going to be pissing off Juliet. So she's, for instance, the priestess in the temple. When she gives the healing, well, you're going to have a hard time getting that healing from her. But if you help Romeo, her approval of you is going to go up. But there's going to be a lot of orcs who don't like that. So even within villages, they're not a monoculture. They all have different hopes and dreams and feelings. So we talked about characters. Why are there only 5 characters in each city? Well, there's going to be a lot more characters, but there will be what I call drones. And they're very simple. Their macro bar, they just have a macro bar, is a function of all the other of the stars in that town's macro bars. And basically, they're just going to be guards and hirelings and scouts and spies and foragers and shopkeepers who aren't complicated, but they just sort of feel generally how the town feels about you. But they won't be able to give you the kind of benefits that the stars will be able to give you. So they will populate the world, but not with millions of stars. I won't go too deep into this slide, but there's like a whole list of things you can accomplish for people. You probably see them, a lot of them in other games. Some of them could be new. Worshipping gods, killing people, rescuing people, collecting resources, destroying resources, and then rewards that these stars can give you. Price adjustments, combat help. They can give you buffs. They can help you build new buildings, which give you other benefits. They'll loan you equipment. They'll give you equipment. They'll send henchmen to help you. And then punishments, the same way. They can do all the negative. They can raise their prices. They can embargo items to you. They can debuff you. They can send out hostile drones to get you. All kinds of crazy stuff. But this is a list we'll just keep growing and growing and growing. But all of these have to come off the macro bars, which are a net effect of the three passion bars. All right. So let's talk about a dramatic event. So we want in this world. I'm speaking very generally about stories so far, and this conversation will stay pretty particular and general about story. The goal, obviously, this is not at the level of a Last of Us story here I'm talking about, or a BioShock story. We're trying to keep it very simple, but I want you to keep in mind that the goal eventually will be, once we have these systems in place, to actually apply real, interesting, meaningful story. But the system comes first. So let's talk about an event, a very traditional event here. So we know authorially that and we feed back to the player that if there's two orc stars that disapprove of the player and any three other stars approve of the player on their macro bar to a certain extent, a red dragon will appear in the world. And the red dragon is what we call an unaligned star. He has no village. All he cares about is death and destruction. That's all he cares about. He doesn't care who you do it to. He just wants them dead. And so he's got a macro bar. And you see he's got all these things he can do for you, all those black lines on the macro bar. And the more terrible things you do, the more ding, the more stuff he gives you. He shows up in battle to help. You know, you kill orcs, then you kill some elves, and you burn down their village, and he gives you a kill-based buff. And then you do so many terrible things. You start a dwarf and goblin war through a series of quests, and now he says, dude, I will destroy any town you want from me. Just give me the word, and I'll go kill it. And that has obviously a major effect in the game. It kills a bunch of stars, really changes the battlefield, but that's the end game with the red dragon. But it's also a silver dragon. If you remember your Dungeons and Dragons, the metallic dragons are nice, and the colored dragons are bad. At least that's the way when I remember it. So the silver dragon only wants you to do constructive things. He doesn't care for who. He wants you to help. He wants you to build. He wants you to craft crops. He wants you to do all those nice things that you want to punch him in the face sometimes. He's so nice. But there is a zero-sum game, and obviously he can give you a whole bunch of stuff, but there's a zero-sum game between the red dragon and the silver dragon. So as you're making one of them happy, you're going to piss the other one off. And if you get one dragon really happy at you, well, guess what? The other dragon's going to be super unhappy with you, and I don't need to tell you what happens after that. So there's this complex web of sort of alliances, allegiances, different, and villages aren't holistic, and they have people can have different feelings within villages, and you're going to have to either, when you go into the game, play them off each other. You're going to have to make some decisions. I'm going to be Mr. Orc this time. I'm going to totally hook up with the Orc village, but that means you're not going to get a bunch of things in other villages, or you're going to play them all off against each other, or you're going to keep both dragons sort of, in the middle, but you're not going to go too far with either one of them, or you won't interact with them at all. These will all be choices in the game. And then you throw in more factions. Here's the dwarves, here's the goblins, all with their stars, all with their drones, and they all play into the other systems. They all speak. Every new thing you add can speak to all the other things that exist. Now let's talk about an event. Now the really original event. From the north comes hordes of white zombies. Now that has a net effect of adding a passion to almost everybody in the world, which is, holy shit, I'm scared of the white zombies. And that's going to, so no matter how they feel about each other, and that was, if you look at Game of Thrones, the Night's Watch went around to all the kings and and they said, hey, help us with the zombies, and only one of them showed up, but they all cared about them to various degrees. So you're going to have different passions, but maybe there's going to be a dwarven necromancer who's like, well, this is awesome. I love the fact that these guys showed up because I'm a necromancer. And so these major events can change the ground underneath you. They won't change the existing passions, but maybe they can add new passions and give you a different way to influence people because new things have happened in the world. All right, so as I said before, I hinted at before, none of this is like earth-shattering from oh my God, that's an amazing narrative. But it's about the opportunities, and it's about opportunities to make this replayable narrative. So we had to build a system first, and this is what this is building the system independent of a game. It applies to this could apply to a first-person game, this could apply to a fantasy game, this could apply to an RTS. The system really can apply to pretty much any game. But I gave you sort of an example of an RPG. But you're building a web of nearly infinite relationship states. And these states, these changes in these states is where you'll fire off our TM, professionally crafted, well-written, well-acted narrative and dialogue. But they won't spawn off trigger points in the world. They'll spawn off a confluence of all these things interacting with each other. So, here's a bunch of characters saying a bunch of things that will be, obviously it's all placeholder dialogue still, but they are saying, except for OMG, that will be in the game. These are spawning off of what you do, and as you influence their passions, they will react to you. Let's go for a detailed example of sort of a story that can form around this. There's you, there's a dwarf named Betty, and an elf named Veronica. They are each of them have a passion. And please, this may, not all women are looking only to get married, and this is not I'm not making a statement about sexual interactions here. This is just a Betty and Veronica example. Pretend they're dudes. Say they're both looking for marriage, and with you. So that's her passion. Now, you start interacting with them, you start doing things to impress and build a relationship with Veronica. So she says, I'd really like you to meet my parents. That's a quest. You have to go to this quest, fight a bunch of monsters, deal with a bunch of crap, craft some flowers, craft a bag of donuts or whatever, and bring it to her parents. That quest 1. Boom. That makes her passion for you grow, and her macro bar starts to move. And she's like, oh, thank you for meeting my parents. Here's a 10 plus 10 sword, a mithril sword. Then you craft Betty a house, and she likes that a lot. She gives you a buff that gives you plus 10 approval to all your actions in her town, in the elf town. So every time you do something for somebody else, they're going to enhance the effect of that because Betty's saying nice things about you. And we'll support that with content. She'll be walking around town saying how awesome you are, singing your praises, and you'll see people react to that, and we'll reinforce that with the game system. Now, if you step back and you look at Betty and Veronica, well, they're not just two different women. Marrying them will yield very different effects. Really, Betty's about crafting. Betty's about building. Betty's about crops. Betty's about sort of earthy things. And Veronica's more royalty, and she can give you lots of nice weapons and treasures and castles and things like that. And you're looking at them, and you're like, okay, well, where's my strategy here as a gamer? How do I want to approach situations? Just like any character decision you make in a game. But you're going to have to decide. You can't marry them both, so you're going to have to decide. And in this case, let's say you choose Veronica, and you decide you want the combat benefits. So you really start pushing on her. You build her an enchanted garden, and that moves her macro bar up to the point where she unlocks the wedding quest for you. And the wedding quest is craft a tuxedo, build a chapel, get the priest's macro bar to a certain place where he's willing to marry you by doing a bunch of crap for him. And any of his passions, not just one quest, getting all his passions to a point where the macro bar yields he's willing to marry you. And then you go on a quest to a dungeon to find the ring that she wants. Let's step ahead for a second. Now, but remember, as you're pleasing Veronica, you're pissing off Betty because she still has hopes for you. But that doesn't mean that you have to go on one track and commit to it. You can waver. You can go back and forth, and you can decide, take your time and decide. But that can have negative impacts because they're both watching what you do, and they're pulling away from you or pulling towards you. So when you complete the quest, you finally said, "Well, I led Betty on long enough. I got to finally put a ring on it. I'm going to marry Veronica." And you do that, and ding, that moves her macro bar to a point where she gives you a combat buff, a permanent combat buff, 1,000 gold, and a castle. And the castle gives you all these other benefits for yourself. But Betty is unhappy with you. So she removes the buff from you that enhanced, say your crafting abilities before. And when she hears the marriage and it really sinks in, and you haven't done any, you remember, you could still make her happy somewhat by doing other things on her passion line. But say you don't do that and she really goes negative on you, she says, well, you can't craft crops in the dwarf village anymore. And that's a real problem for you because you really wanted that, but you made a choice. You made a choice, and like a big boy, you got to live with that choice. Big boy or girl, you got to live with that choice. But here's a twist. We will write different characters for these people. We will give them their own hopes and dreams, their feelings, there are different characters. We've written lots of different characters. There's Shodan and Elizabeth and Andrew Ryan. They all have different characters that are basically independent of any game systems. And people like them or hate them or like spending time or don't spend time with them. Well, independent of how you feel about them systemically, you're going to feel about them, hopefully, if we do our job right, as people. So you may marry Veronica, but you may like Betty a lot more. And you're going to have to live with that because you're going to have to spend a lot of time. She'll go on quests with you, things like that, and spend time with you and interact with you. You're going to have to think about that. And the player's going to be sort of making choices between what he wants sort of, what character he likes to spend time with, and what he needs to grow in this game. Fortunately, unlike life, you can replay it and marry the other one next time. So with good writing, hopefully, players should be able to have to balance physical gain versus these emotional fulfillment decisions. And with all these systems, your ability to play one off the other, the ability to, kind of keep people happy, but by these people kind of happy, those people are really happy, but by betraying friends they've had, moving their macro bars down, there will be false friends, leading people on, betrayals and reconciliations. You could, if you do your job right, end up simulating something along the lines of this. Or any other sort of narrative experience where you have lots of people who are plotting against each other and playing one off each other. You could make. I think you could, within Grasp, start to try to simulate something like that, but driven not by your TV set, driven by you. Let's talk about hidden passions. Hidden passions. So characters that, let's just say, for argument's sake, have 3 passions at the beginning, but maybe they also have hidden passions, which are not revealed at first. These are a resource. Knowing about people's hidden passions means you can impact upon them in different ways. If you don't know about the passion, you can't impact upon the passion. And it's a resource that other characters can give you about themselves, depending on their macro bar, or they can give you gossip about characters they know. So let's say you've been friends with Romeo the Elf. You've really grown his macro bar, and one of the thresholds is, hey, I know about this cool quest. Why don't you come on it with me, and we'll share the riches. So you go on the quest with Romeo, and he tells you all about himself, about his hopes and his dreams, and how he really strangely hates dwarves in a creepy way. And he tells you he writes poetry, and he reads you some of his poems, and you really get to know him. And you're about to go in the dungeon, and you go down the dungeon, and you sort of help him on the quest, complete the quest. That moves his macro bar to another stage. Ding. And he says, I'm going to reveal to you one of my secret passions. I'm in love with Juliet the orc. And so now you know a new passion about Romeo because you spent time with him, you've interacted with him, and you've given him what he wanted on his bars. And now you've got to make a decision because you know now that he's not going to like it when you beat up on orcs because he's in love with Juliet the orc. So you have to make some decisions. Do I continue this friendship with Romeo? Do I abandon the orcs? Like, what do I do here? So you can see it's a new passion here. So the orc reinforcements come in this dungeon, and boom, one of them is Juliet. So now you have to make a decision about what you're going to do. Well, obviously, he's not going to kill her. What do you do? But then say you're on the same quest with a different character. He doesn't care. It's just, let's go kill all those motherfuckers. Okay, so replayability. And that's central to this. Games we've made generally have had add-ons. I'm very fond of them, but they're add-ons. They're not add-ins. You add it to the end of the experience. Games like Civilization, XCOM add in to the situation. Allow you to start the game over and play a very different feeling version of the game. So obviously the player will have each playthrough. They can choose different stars to befriend, different people to take on board, different people to turn against, and that's player-driven. They can support the same characters but to different extents. Then let's talk about the passion pool. Okay, so let's say Frank the Orc actually has 10. We write, produce, record, cast 10 different whole passion sets for him. But in each game, we only get 3. We choose at random 3 of them. So we all have different stages in our life where we care about different things. You're encountering Frank at a different stage of his life. He's still the same guy, still the same character. But at one point of his life, he cares about hating the elves, who temple the old gods, and he wants to woo Barbara. But then he's married, and he still hates the elves, but his marriage is not going the way he thought, so maybe he secretly loves Romeo the elf. And, he wants something different in his life now. And he also is, he's looking to his retirement. He really wants a piece of the cat's eye medallion. And so he's a different guy this time, and he may have other secret passions. So that's, when you come into the game, you'll still see the same people, but they may have different goals. And of course, we can make, over time, new passions, new characters, new quests, new factions, all those things available as time goes on. So for instance, you add a new faction, the werewolves. The orc does not like werewolves, but one of the elves has a thing for one of the werewolves. So these are new passions you can play off And the werewolves have their own passions, of course. Okay, and this is not a promise of any kind. We have no idea whether we're doing anything like this, but let's talk about co-op multiplayer. So say my brother and I are playing the game together, and we have, in real life, we have a great relationship. But we come across some elves. He's done a lot of work befriending the elves. He spent a lot of resources befriending the elves. The elves hate me. They hate my guts. And they see me, and I get ambushed by the elves because I pissed off somebody's macro bar to a certain point where they sent an ambush at me. And I'm on the headset with my brother. He's in New Jersey. I'm in Boston. And I'm like, Stu, come on, the elves are attacking me. Help me out. He's like, well, I don't know. Those elves have been pretty good to me. So, sorry, Ken. And, I'm dead. And he's like, hangs out the elves. And, if you ever play Diplomacy, which is one of my favorite games of all time, you know the effects of some of these betrayals that can happen in games. One of my dearest friends in the world, I still kind of hate because of a game of Diplomacy, because it's the game relationship versus your personal relationship. So all these relationships, if you bring real people into it, I think can really expand to a whole new level. And that's it. Questions? Start there.
In a lot of what you said, the NPCs were aware of all actions that were taken by the player. How will things like lying and taking actions in secret be managed in this kind of system?
I think it's a really good question. I think that's beyond the scope of what I've thought about yet. I think it's something it could complicate things. It could also be a really cool thing. But I think that how information gets propagated, maybe we need some kind of feedback about information propagating throughout the world. Maybe you have some ways to keep information from propagating. Maybe there's tools you can have for that. I think that it's a really interesting space. I just haven't thought it through yet. But it's a good question. We'll go step to third one.
Hi there. So one potential issue I can see with this is that a lot of times in stories and TV shows, the most interesting things are when a character feels very conflicted about another character. Like, for example, when Deborah finds out that Dexter is a serial killer, sorry, spoilers, she's conflicted with her police values, but also with her family values. And it seems like with your system, you would still have a sort of combinatorial explosion of sort of art and voice acting and writing, because you need to sort of consider all these possibilities of every passion that each character might be in, not just the macro passion, but also the specific states of the non-macro passion.
Yeah, I think I'm not in any way pretending there's a trivial amount of writing work to be done here. I think there's a substantial amount of writing work. The difference is because they bounce off each other and they play off each other, they're reusable. And they can appear in different games, they can appear in different contexts, but there's still a full, plenty big writing job to be done here. I'm not trying to write less. I'm trying to write stuff that can be reused and replayed in different contexts. But you're completely right. And starting to track that combinatorial explosion is going to be, I think, one of the first steps when you start doing the math to see how much stuff you can really support. But writing is relatively cheap. It's what excites me about this is the fact that it's different and it's driven by the player. So, you have to scale that to taste and what you can afford.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi. System sounds very interesting. The likability of a star towards a player made me think a bit of Dragon Age Origins, and something that was kind of a letdown in that system was that I was never motivated for a character to dislike me, other than player imposed narrative.
Yes.
My guy's a paladin type character. I'm not going to like the witch.
Yep.
But in the end, I needed everyone to like me so I can get the benefits from them liking me, so on and so forth. So I had to do actions that kind of went against my character to fulfill the game needs. How do you plan on balancing that or giving positive rewards for some players disliking?
Well, I don't think positive rewards for making people hate you is the right thing. I think the zero-sum game is where that comes in. Because I was talking to a friend of mine about, he worked on a game, created a game called Dogs, he's right there. And, the dog would like you or not like you depending on different things. But because the dog was the only actor in the world, you had that challenge. Exactly what you're talking about is like, you're not going to kick the dog in the face, you know? So like, how do you deal with that? And that's why the zero-sum games are so important. Just like real life, you can be nice to somebody all day long, and just by being nice to that person and ignoring the other person, hey, you're doing game development, and your wife's at home waiting for you. Zero-sum game. And that's the problem that I think we want to highlight. Because I don't think the choice of good and evil, to me, is always that challenging thing. It's like, well, I don't want to be a jerk, but just by what you don't do or what you do for others makes you a jerk to some people because they don't like it. Hey, you went to dinner with that guy? Fuck you. And I think that's the heart of how you deal with that problem.
Okay. Thank you.
So it sounded like sort of...
Sorry about all the cursing, by the way. I'm a bit foul.
It sounded like your sort of stars were fixed characters, even though they were going to have like different passions every time you restarted the game. It sounded like Frank the orc was always going to be the blacksmith in the shop. Maybe I didn't get that, but so I was wondering, what are your thoughts on sort of having stars emerge based on who the player wants to interact with?
So I think that I mean, one thing I like about these sort of replayable games is they let you set all the sliders and all the variables. So, you know, I don't think and a lot of things get trickier once you have things like leaderboards and achievements and stuff like that, but you can invalidate, you know, those things for the purpose of a game. But I'm really a fan of saying, I want to play a game where Frank has these passions and this guy has these passions, if you want that, because it's your game. And the system, unlike where you can't really do that in a game like Infinite, right? This game, I think, would allow for that. So I support it in concept, absolutely, because that's the kind of games I love. I like setting every little checkbox myself. It makes it the game mine.
So it seemed like there might be a bit of a disconnect between the interesting dynamics of each quest and the somewhat selfish rewards you get for it, possibly a boost for a main quest. How do you think this game would work if you eliminate these reward boosts or even eliminate a main quest and these side quests were the entire game?
So I don't actually, main quest is a really interesting question. Do you need a main quest? I don't actually know. We've been talking about that. Because a main quest implies a macro narrative that moves on. And macro narrative fights against this sort of experimental game. Again, going back to Civilization, there's a macro narrative in the sense that you have 5, 6 different, and I actually had a bunch of slides about this, but I thought it was beyond the scope of the talk, like win conditions and things like that, potential win conditions, because I thought that was game design, not a system design. So you could say, I can win the world by destroying one of the villages, I can win the game by destroying the village, I can win it by making them all like me a certain amount, by whatever. You can set different win conditions, or you can sort of set a macro story, but I'd much rather have these events that happen, that change the dynamics, like the White Walker example I gave, than enforcing a story. Now, again, I don't know if that's going to work. And knowing myself, you always get drawn into what you know and what you do. So that's why we're sort of really trying to, reset here, because we've done the same thing for so long. So I think my discipline is to always try to start with what do we need to make this a great game. And right now, I don't know if that's a macro story. The stories may all come out of these entirely player-driven experiences.
So how are you modeling the passions? There was a talk from the AI Summit 2 years ago by Stefan Bura from Storybricks.
Yep, I've talked to Stefan.
Yeah, presented kind of a great way of modeling passions. I was wondering how close it is to what he was talking about.
So Stefan is one of those people who's out there that is thinking about these things, and we've had a bunch of conversations. And I think that, what I like about this is that there are people, and some other friends of mine in the industry are talking about this. The place where I've been thinking, and we're actually going to get together later, that I've been thinking since I last talked to him, I sort of really focused on, my focus has been on rather than making characters with a range of emotions, making a characters with very few passions, these 3 passions, and all these zero-sum game situations, because I'm probably less ambitious than he is to some degree. And as a writer, I'm like, how do I make characters come out rather than people come out? So I think that's really where the direction I've been going in. That could all change. We may sit down and have lunch later. He may be like, you're a fucking idiot. Let me tell you why. And this whole talk is a waste of everybody's time. But that's where, since our last conversation a couple months ago, that's where I've really been going with this. And we sort of he and I have both been I found he called me afterwards like, oh, I announced this talk. He's like, I've been working on something very similar. So I think this is one of the reasons you want transparency here. You want openness. Is you want to be able to talk. The reason I'm doing this talk is you want to engage everybody's brain because I think it's an important problem. I think it's hard to deny it's an important problem. And the more of us who are thinking about it, and that's why I wanted this, out there, and it's pretty early, is so we can have lots of smart people like Stefan and talking about this.
Thanks. Hi.
Hi.
What about modifying passions? What if you could do something to convince Frank that elves aren't actually so bad? It could still be zero-sum, because now the other orcs really hate both Frank and you.
Yes, so I think that's a possibility. Like, my sense is that I'm not ready to play the drum fills yet. I'm sort of getting the rhythm down. And so I think there's lots of ways to play on this system and to interact with this system. My first step, our team, I'm talking to Eric Erling, who's our lead technology guy, about this a lot, is like, I think the first step to modeling this is you design a paper and pen adventure, you use D20 system, right? You set up a bunch of quests, you set up a bunch of characters, passions, and the only thing you use a computer for in the first test is to track the passions and the macro passions and the interactions of those, because that's a lot of data. But you could just with pen and paper start to play out this system and see how parsable it is and see how it works. And that's probably our first step before we even really touch a computer. You could probably do this in a database application. And then we'll build from there. But the options to expand upon it and play with it are infinite, presuming that you don't overflow what I call player RAM. Like how much stuff can they keep in their head at once? And it may be a great idea, and you may play with it. Well, just like all these ideas, it may be a great idea. You may play with it. It may be a terrible idea. It's hard to say until you try it. But that's one of the goals. Is a starting point.
All right, thanks.
Yes.
So I'm a designer on the Civilization franchise, and I wanted to say how
Sorry,
excited
say it again.
Designer on the Civilization franchise.
Oh, well, I'm a fanboy.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, we're big fans of your work as well, and it's exciting to see your approach. One of the things the macro sort of mood modifier reminds me of, especially, is the sort of opinion system that we use in Civ. And I think the examples that you used are definitely the most colorful and interesting and kind of prone to narrative flavor when you have the one orc feeling this way and the other orc feeling this way, and kind of like aligning the passions in such a way that the player works towards them really liking you or really disliking you. And I was wondering if you had thought about, or if you have any ideas about how to kind of avoid a lot of the NPCs ending up in that kind of like middle gray space, because there are ways to solve it with like the combinatorial writing explosion of like, yeah, maybe you built the temple for the old gods, but you did elf quests, so like you're in this neutral state with this NPC, but it's kind of hard to reflect.
I mean, to me, that's a balance problem, because the rewards in the middle space are going to be pretty marginal, right? Versus the big rewards, you're going to have to really take some big swings with people.
So you want gameplay to kind of drive players towards the edges. Okay.
So you can keep, getting 5% price reductions at the store from everybody. That's not really going to move the needle. To really accomplish those larger quests, to really accomplish those larger quests, you're going to have to get people really passionate about you one way or the other. And as I said, the zero-sum games is going to lead to you make some real friends, you're going to make some real enemies.
Yeah, and the transparency will help players get there.
Exactly.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for the talk. You talked a lot about how it's very player-focused, all the actions from the player, those decisions. But you also mentioned these hidden systems that you uncover by having these relationships. And I'm curious, in minimal interaction, what happens when you see a confrontation and you step back? Do the AI find out hidden passions of each other on their own? What happens if you hide in the bushes during the events that are occurring?
So a passion, remember, is as far as I think about it at this early stage, is only what a character feels about a situation in relationship to you and that you can impact upon. So, I mean, the notion of a player knowing about another player, a character knowing about another character's passion is relevant in how they talk about them. We can make colorful stuff. Yeah, I heard about Romeo. He's got weird taste, Or, as I said, he can reveal potentially, if one of the people's macro bars could be revealing passion, a secret passion about somebody else. And that just basically is another meter you can push on for them. So I don't know if there's like there's systemic meaning in what you're talking about. I'm not saying there couldn't be, but as I'm thinking about it right now, I don't think it's, when we did this thing and a bunch of us worked on it, what we kept coming back to was, it's very easy to step out of the system and start coming up with, is that 5? Yeah. Come up with narrative things that could happen, but we kept saying, no, it has to come out of it has to spawn out of this system. And so you don't want to just sort of saying, oh, these guys start feeling this way about you, but independent of the passion system, because then you're just, you're just sort of throwing artificial things into the mix. You're throwing in hacks, basically. And we want the system to work at a core basis. Not saying we can't expand the system, but we want everything to be driven from the core system.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My question is about player choices. And I was wondering, there are, for every simulationist or narrative-driven player who's all about portraying the character in an RPG, there's quite a few more who are playing the game mostly because they maybe like the choice system and they like how the system enables them to basically kill everyone, and they care not for whom the blood flows. But I was wondering, how would you handle?
It's a dark question.
Yeah. How would you handle inconsistent player choices in delivering a coherent narrative experience through a system without necessarily using a zero-sum game?
So I think the biggest problem is going to come out with thresholding back and forth between, if you're constantly moving somebody back and forth towards a feeling towards you, I think that you may find you know what I'm talking about? Well, I did this thing, and he loves me, and now he closes the store, now he opens the store, now he closes the store. Well, you could reflect that certainly in dialogue, dude, you're driving me crazy, but you could also potentially start putting in modifiers. Once you get past a certain threshold, on a positive, it's harder to make them dislike you. You've built up credibility and trust with them, but that would have to be transparent and systemic. And I think you may want to do that to avoid situations like that. And when somebody hates you, you really got to work. But you can get them back, but you really, really got to work. We had a notion of locking at the end that you couldn't come back from it. And I think, in my experience, that's probably less interesting, that if there's a way to come back to what's super hard, that would be kind of cool. That person probably always carry, that negative mathematical twist we put on it will come across the narrative okay, but I still don't trust you, Where if they got into the same point without going so negative, they wouldn't have that I still don't trust you line. They would just be okay, I'll do this thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. I was wondering, when would you think to input an end game of this system? And what would you do for the player at the end? Would it be a Fallout style, recapping of all the relationships you've built, or?
I think that's probably beyond the scope, of what I'm talking about, because I think that's a game design decision, a particular game, where this is a system. How do you want to end it? There's a million ways you can end it. I don't actually think this dictates any of those things. You could have a bunch of narrative events. You could have, when certain thresholds are met, like I said, you could have when certain towns are destroyed. There's a million end games you could do. I think that's not what my first priority is. So all I can do is beg ignorance on this one and say that's something for down the road.
Yeah, so I've thought about similar systems quite a bit, and I find it very interesting. But one of the conflicts I always find with it is that it seems very hard to design a sort of deeply thematic narrative that deals with these types of open-ended systems. Given that you've dealt a lot with deeply thematic narratives, do you see a solution to that, or do you see these as sort of mutually exclusive types of narratives?
I think it's a really good question. And the honest answer is it's hard to say, and that's part of the experiment. I want to get up here and say, we could definitely have the best of both worlds, right? I don't know if I can say that yet, because in the same way, Civilization has a narrative, right? It's this meta-narrative. Sports have a narrative, right? When you play a football game, there's a bunch of rules, but it not only has a narrative, it has a meta-narrative. Well, that guy just left the Giants, and now he's on the Chargers. Is that a team? Yeah, is that right? And so he's got this rivalry going. So there's a meta-narrative, and he just fucked that guy's wife, and oh my God, what's going to happen on the field? So there's a meta-narrative around those things, and I think there will be a narrative that forms in this much more supportive than a Civilization arc, because of all these characters and the dialogue and the ability to have, a multi-track feeling, characters having multi-track feelings about you. I think that's going to be a very interesting question. That's going to be the goal. and we're just going to have to see how that plays out.
Hopefully,
but it's a really good question. But yes, it will.
Totally.
Buy it.
Yeah, so the world that you describe here would only change if the player decides to do something to change it. But like something that, for instance, Stalker, in my opinion, did really well, or in a really interesting way, is that things happen even without you doing anything about it. The world itself is alive and changing, even when you're not there.
Yeah.
How would that, how would you implement that in a system like this?
So the White Walkers example I gave is an interesting one. That could be something that's spawned off of a bunch of things you do, or we could just, sometime roll the die or plan or authorially plan on it to happen. And you see there are a lot of board games actually where events happen, like XCOM is a great example, where they sort of put a new template of event that comes in, and that changes how you have to play. So I don't know yet. I think it will allow for either one. I want to make sure the player feels that that they are at the helm. On the other hand, I was talking to my friend Drew yesterday about Ned Stark, and how Ned thinks he can play everybody off one another, and he can keep everybody happy, and he finds out what happens. He tries to keep everybody happy. And then you have situations that happen outside of your control, and I think that is something interesting if you look at Game of Thrones. That's always happening. People think they have things in charge, and then Tyrion comes in and shoots you in the gut with a crossbow. And so I think you have to balance that to make sure the player still feels that they are the driving force in the world, but maybe you do want the White Walkers to appear by fiat.
Thanks.
All right, I think that's all we can do right now. Thanks, guys.